The bell tolls at midnight. Greetings. I'd like to welcome all of my midnight marauders. Come on in, get comfy, and lend me your imagination. They say that you can't choose your family, and with that comes all that you inherit from them. For Agasa LeBlanc, that means inheriting powerful abilities that he must learn to master and dark forces that he can never seem to outrun, wanting to take those powers from him. I resume this midnight tale with our second entry, Perils of the Dynamic, Part 2, Trust No One. Agasa was shivering as he sped down the pitch-black snow-filled one-way road with his jacket still flapping in the wind. His clothes were soaked from the falling sleet when all of a sudden the snow bike started to sputter, causing the bike to shake violently. Agasa gripped the handlebars as he tried to steady the bike, but the front tire hit a pothole and sent the bike airborne, tossing Agasa like a rag doll as his body smacked hard against the frozen ground. Agasa, not knowing if he were still alive or dead, came to, next to a roaring fireplace, hearing the loud crackle of wooden logs burning. He tried to steady his vision beyond the glow of the fire flames, desperate to see who was sitting across the room staring in his direction. The figure approached Agasa as he winced in pain, fearing he may have ultimately fell prey and was captured by the Dark Ones. Agasa's logic immediately ruled out that thought, as he would not be comforted in this manner if that had been the case. With Agasa's eyes steadied and focused, he began to recognize the woman standing in front of him was none other than the store clerk he'd seen right before he fainted in the gas station. Agasa tried to talk, but his face was swollen and bandaged with dressings around his head, similar to the dressing he'd noticed on his shoulder when he'd awakened in the house where he'd just barely escaped the Dark One. "Shh, don't try to speak, young man," the woman said as she leaned in close, lifting Agasa's head to help him take small sips of water from a cup she was holding in her hand. "My name is Rebecca Lyles, the owner of the gas station you entered some ways back. When you entered the store, you looked beaten and disheveled, so I instantly knew something was wrong. You told me it had found you, then you collapsed. My daughter Bailey and I got you out of there quickly and safely. We took you to the workhouse and set up a way for you to escape in the event that whatever the thing was that found you wouldn't have such an easy time catching you. Unbelievably, even without us alerting you of the escape route, you were able to follow the escape route to the T." An inquisitive look formed on Rebecca's face, and she asked, "Who are you, mister? And what the hell was that thing after you?" Agasa tried again to speak, but could not explain his ordeal. He looked in the opposite corner of the room and noticed a young woman resembling Rebecca. She looked to be in her early 20s. Presumably, she was Rebecca's daughter, Bailey. Bailey stared at Agasa, speechless, with fear and concern in her eyes as she sat silently watching him. Rebecca looked at Agasa and said, "I want you to know you are safe here. Just rest now, okay?" Agasa closed his tired eyes, trying with all his might to let his thoughts subside from all of the perils of this hellish nightmare he'd already endured thus far. Agasa finally drifted off into a deep sleep, something he hadn't been able to do for what seemed like an eternity. During his deep slumber, he dreamt that he was back home in his earlier years with Mama Angel, feeling her warm presence and soft, reassuring voice. In his dream, Mama Angel told Agasa how proud she was of him and urged him to stay the course to find his family on this perilous journey. And most of all, trust no one. Mama Angel, who had passed on nearly 5 years ago, somehow from beyond the grave, always seemed to know when Agasa needed her encouragement and guidance. Agasa felt a tap on his hand, which startled him, causing him to attempt to jump up into a sitting position. However, he was immediately met with a calm and steady voice as he focused on Rebecca, saying, Hey there, you're okay, Agasa. Just easy, okay? Bailey made you some bone broth soup to help heal your body and give you adequate nutrition since you can't chew due to your broken jaw. Agasa's eyes focused on Bailey as she brought over a cup of broth with a straw in it to help make it easier for Agasa to intake his meal. Realizing the pain that it caused Agasa to speak due to his broken jaw, Rebecca told him to blink once for yes and twice for no. Agasa blinked once as he fully understood Rebecca's way to communicate. She then asked Agasa if she could sit him up to eat and after his meal clean him up and change his bandages to keep them from getting infected. Agasa blinked once again as she helped him sit up, placing a pillow behind his back on the comfortable daybed he'd been resting on in the corner of the large, dark, old-looking cabin with a large deer head over the fireplace. Agasa sat there wincing in pain, but he was grateful for Rebecca and Bailey's kindness. He felt as though Mama Angel had intervened and blessed him with 2 angels to help him through this devastating ordeal. Agasa looked around the room as Bailey began to ask him questions about himself. "Do you have a family?" Bailey asked. Rebecca interrupted her by saying, "He doesn't owe us a rundown of his personal information. If he wants us to know that, then he'll reveal it at his own time. But for now, let him drink his soup and rest, okay, Bailey?" Rebecca gave a stern look at Bailey, who now looked embarrassed as Rebecca pulled up a chair near the edge of the bed. She took the cup of soup from Bailey's hand so she could commence helping Agasa finish his broth. Bailey sat down at the table, put on her earphones, and began bopping her head to her music as she grabbed her phone to play a game, shifting her focus away from Rebecca and Agasa. Rebecca smiled at Agasa, who had completely finished his soup and nodded his head to thank her for her hospitality. She began explaining to Agasa about where he was and how he got there. Agasa focused on Rebecca as she began removing his bandages ever so carefully and talking to him, saying, "When we saw what was chasing you, we were frozen with fear. All we could do was hide and pray that you noticed the adjoining door, the snow bike with the keys in the ignition and the garage door button. We were in absolute disbelief at the fact that you knew where everything was before we had even gotten a chance to tell you about the escape route. How the hell did you know?" She stared at Agasa as he slowly turned his head, looking around the cabin-style room with the dark wooden floors and a giant bearskin rug in front of the fireplace. There were several guns mounted on a wall rack near what looked like a padlocked cabinet where ammo was possibly stored. Agasa felt like this room had a masculine resemblance to it. Rebecca then offered him 2 pain pills and a glass of water. Agasa blinked once for yes. Rebecca placed the pills on Agasa's tongue and held the glass of water to Agasa's mouth to help him swallow the medication. Rebecca, with Bailey's help, successfully changed Agasa's bandages. She also changed his beddings to fresh linens and pillows for restful comfortability. Agasa began to feel the effects of the pain pills working immediately, and quickly began drifting back off into a deep sleep. Agasa began tossing and turning while hearing the voice of the Dark One trying to locate him telepathically, searching desperately for his energy, but the signal kept dropping. Agasa was unable to be reached by the Dark Ones. For the first time in weeks, they were unable to pinpoint his location through the vibration of his energy, and Agasa was able to finally inhale and exhale. Breathing ever so deeply, he let his tense body fully deflate while sinking into the bed and relaxing his whole being, mind, body, and soul. Agasa slept as if he and Mama Angel were still in the LeBlanc house in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and everything was as right as rain. Days went by, and Agasa was able to sit up on his own, feed himself with a straw, and verbally communicate. "Where am I exactly?" Agasa asked in a low voice as he gazed at the fireplace while Rebecca poked the logs, shifting them in the fireplace. "You're in Alaska," Rebecca replied. Alaska?" Agasa repeated with astonishment. "How did I get here?" Agasa said waveringly. Rebecca told a surprised Agasa that the night they witnessed the Dark One chasing him, they knew they needed reinforcements to completely leave the area and get to their bunker. She also told Agasa that she alerted one of her late husband's longtime military buddies, Carl, of her desperate attempt to help a young gentleman in dire need of shelter and a safe place to lay low. Carl was very skeptical of Agasa, but knew that Rebecca was a great judge of character, and if she stuck her neck out to help you, you must be a pretty decent person. Carl had also vowed to Rebecca's late husband, Neil, that he'd always watch over her and Bailey and be there for whatever they needed him to do, whenever they needed him to do it. With that understood, Carl loaded up the plane and flew them to their destination, making sure they were fully equipped with any and everything they'd need for however long the stay. Rebecca continued to explain to Agasa, "He checks in on us via a specialized medium-frequency radio system that can penetrate the Earth or utilize existing metal infrastructure. Within the thick concrete and steel walls of the bunker, standard cell phone or Wi-Fi signals are almost completely blocked." Agasa began to feel panicked, but suddenly felt reassured of his safety from the Dark One. Agasa decided not to make known the power he possessed to shapeshift. He always understood that knowing he had the power to change into a leopard would surely cause anyone near him to panic. He could understand the conceptions they would have in their mind, like whether or not he would even be in control of his own being, or just a wild, out-of-control animal like his appearance as a leopard would suggest. Truth be told, these were questions that Agasa himself didn't even have definitive answers to. Agasa steadied himself, and for the first time, he attempted to stand. Rebecca rushed to his side with Bailey close by while he firmly held Rebecca's shoulder. Agasa held his bandaged rib cage with his other hand and gently stood in place, securely on his feet. He took a deep breath and step by step slowly began to explore this dim cabin's inner sanctum with Rebecca guiding him. He closely examined the pictures and wall art. Rebecca, noticeably astounded by Agasa's strength, asked, "How is your level of pain?" Agasa replied with only one word, "Bearable." Agasa, now able to breathe a small sigh of relief and feeling a bit better about his security and the situation at hand, said to Rebecca, "Do you have any music?" Rebecca looked thrilled as she replied with delight, "Heck yeah! What's your preference?" A smile loomed across Agasa's face. Yeah, Mama A's weekends always came with a soulful soundtrack playing in the background. "Yeah, I'd love to know which artist," said an extremely interested Rebecca. "Man, where do I start? Marvin Gaye, Stevie Wonder, Luther Vandross, Al Green, Teddy Pendergrass, Barry White, Smokey Robinson. Oh, and of course the hardest working man in show business. What you know about the boss?" Rebecca's eyes lit up and she said, Oh, I do have Bruce Springsteen too." Agasa looked at Rebecca and said, "Not that boss. You do know that James Brown paid the cost to be the boss, right? They both laughed, Rebecca playfully adding, "Oh yeah, James Brown." Agasa chuckled as Rebecca cha-cha'd her way over to an old throwback record player and began digging through an old milk crate resting beside it. She pulled out just about every single original album Agasa had mentioned. She laughed as she opened an old James Brown album while wiping the dust off of the cover and blowing any lint off of the vinyl. She laid the record on a vintage record player while saying to Agasa, "I know a little summin' about this," as James Brown's "Paid the Cost to Be the Boss" began to play. The funky and soulful tune filled the entire bunker. Agasa, smiling widely, felt the words penetrate in his soul as he said, "Now that's what I'm talking about," as laughter filled the room. Rebecca and Bailey cut a step or two, and Agasa bobbed his head to this legendary, iconic man of soul's timeless masterpiece. The day was filled with a peaceful calm, truly something Agasa hadn't had ever since his days at the LeBlanc house with Mama Angel. He sat there, gazing in the fireplace as the dancing flames seemed to hypnotize and comfort him. Rebecca and Bailey enjoyed sharing many other songs with Agasa for hours, some of which he'd never heard before as Bailey introduced him to her Gen Z playlists. After a few hours, Agasa's stomach began to growl loudly. Agasa's appetite was almost back to normal as his body began to heal and seemingly required more nourishment. Rebecca excused herself into the larder room of the bunker to retrieve meat and a few canned vegetables to make a hearty beef stew to satisfy their hungry bellies. While Rebecca was in the larder, Bailey curiously questioned Agasa once again. "Do you have any family back in Louisiana?" "No," Agasa replied. "I've been on my own ever since my grandmother transitioned a few years ago." A somber look fell over Agasa's face as Bailey expressed her condolences. Agasa quickly brightened the mood by letting Bailey know that he's okay and has come to realize that Mama Angel's passing was simply a transference of energy and that she's still with him in spirit. Agasa knew that Bailey was thinking of her dearly departed father, and he just wanted her to know that he's around her also. Bailey's face showed relief as she calmly smiled at Agasa and excused herself back to her headphones and handheld video game. Agasa, feeling weak, laid down on the bed near the crackling fire, letting his mind absorb all the things he'd come to know as his reality. He wondered about his warning from Mama Angel to trust no one and to get to his family in Los Angeles, California. Rebecca soon returned with the evening's menu, which, having been a short-order cook himself, which Agasa delighted in before he abruptly had to flee the restaurant, never to return. The aroma of the stew being prepared smelled delicious and bore remnants of Agasa's life in a quiet, peaceful place that he longed for once again. Agasa felt content and grappled with the notion of one day soon having to leave and once again take the terrifying leap into unknown territory of being relentlessly hunted day and night by the Dark Ones. Agasa rubbed his weary head, trying to erase the thoughts that plagued his mind about actually being stalked by these creatures. Agasa knew he couldn't stay here and would have to leave soon to make it to his loved ones in California. He knew he would have to sneak away from Rebecca and Bailey in order to do so. Rebecca would never let Agasa brave this perilous ordeal alone after finding out about the Dark One. And Agasa couldn't bear the thought of exposing them to inevitable danger while trying to help him survive. Agasa made up his mind to sneak off when the coast was clear, accepting without question that he had to go it alone. Rebecca finished up with dinner and served Agasa a heaping bowl of her award-worthy beef stew. Agasa took his first bite and then his last in less than 3 minutes. "Rebecca, the stew is absolutely remarkable," said Agasa, as Rebecca retrieved his bowl and filled it to capacity again. She looked giddy as Agasa polished off yet another bowl in a matter of minutes. Suddenly, an alarm began to go off. Rebecca looked at her surveillance monitors covered and hidden, sitting on a shelf near an old leather Easy Boy recliner. She zoomed in, looking closely at the outside surroundings with her monitor lens, noticing a pack of coyotes fighting over what looked like a rabbit carcass in the snow. Rebecca turned to look at Agasa, who sat quiet as she said, "Nothing to see but a few coyotes." She gave a nervous laugh and excused herself into one of the back rooms. Agasa was thinking of a way to leave the bunker and redirect his focus on the very vital situation at hand. His strength was returning to normal after several weeks of bed rest and good nutrition. He was now able to move his arms and legs without feeling much pain at all. His jaw felt strong, although his rib cage was still a little sore, but the pain was tolerable. It was a beautiful Saturday morning, and Agasa was eager to get some fresh air and see the sun. He began his morning by stretching his limbs near his bedside, carefully maintaining his balance. Rebecca approached him saying, "So how are you feeling?" Agasa smiled and responded, "I feel much better. I can never thank you enough for your kindness, but trust me, I will find a way to repay your generosity." "Don't be silly, Agasa," responded Rebecca in a low tone. "Of course you're welcome to stay." Agasa looked at Rebecca as she glared at him with a stone face. "Excuse me?" replied Agasa. "Yeah, you'll get used to it, even though it may begin to feel a little claustrophobic at times," said Rebecca. "In about a year or 2, you'll be fine." Agasa felt his heart drop as Rebecca smiled the most sinister smile and continued, "Honestly, I don't think you'll ever want to leave, and I don't think I'd want you to either." Agasa couldn't help but feel slightly confused and unsettled as Rebecca quickly turned and hastily walked out the room. Agasa's eyes slowly became fixed upon something that he seemingly hadn't noticed before. In the corner of the bunker was a coat rack with what appeared to be 5 men's coats hanging on it. He then began to realize that Rebecca may have her own plans to keep him from leaving. But why?